Well, welcome. And aren't we all glad that we're on Zoom tonight and not out on the highway? But that rain is always welcome. Okay, tonight we're strutting our stuff. And this is season 2. We did it once before and we all loved it. These members tonight have all either volunteered or agreed when asked to share pictures of their yard and tell us a little bit about the history and the planning or the development of that yard. And we have 5 people presenting tonight. So on with the show. The first garden we'll see is that of Cheryl Folks, our current chapter secretary. She's lived in her house for 20 years. So that gave her plenty of time to do and undo.
Hello, I'm Cheryl Folks, and I'd like to share my journey of creating a wildscape. We started with a basic suburban lot, not quite half an acre. There were 6 Chinese tallows, 3 loblolly pines, a live oak, a green ash, and lots of St. Augustine turf. The front yard had the standard residential plantings, including waxleaf ligustrums and Japanese boxwoods. Our plan was to remove the Chinese tallows, plant native trees along the perimeter of the yard, and a rather vague concept to encourage wildlife. Now there is a beautiful bur oak instead of the Chinese tallow. The waxleaf ligustrums were removed and 2 American hollies were added. The Japanese boxwoods were replaced with wax myrtles, the inset. Wax myrtles are one of the highest rated plants for supporting wildlife, especially songbirds. It is evergreen with a lovely soft shape and provides berries enjoyed by numerous species of birds. They truly deserve more consideration as foundation plants. The tall plants at the base of the bur oak started as volunteers. I would not have considered those, but nature suggested otherwise. So the seaside goldenrod has been growing there for at least 5 years. It is very well behaved, gets only 3 to 4 feet tall, and blooms even though there is only dappled sun. Once we removed the Chinese tallows, we planted a river birch and 2 oak trees along the back perimeter of the yard. Then the squirrels planted a red oak in a corner, and the birds planted a hackberry along the front fence. This all eventually resulted in a very shady yard, but does provide nesting sites and food sources for birds throughout the year. The next 5 slides show views in the backyard. Behind the gazebo is an eastern red cedar that provides evergreen cover. To the left of the gazebo is a grapefruit tree that froze 2 years ago. We removed the thorny limbs and left the trunk standing. It now provides a perch for songbirds so they can inspect the surroundings before coming down for a meal. I have 3 large dogs, lab mixes, so delicate plants don't survive here. These native perennials replaced a section of St. Augustine turf and flourish in spite of the dogs and the numerous squirrels that also dig in the beds. The next slide shows the end of this bed, the section just beyond the bright yellow coreopsis, and how it changes throughout the year. These views show the seasonal succession of the plants in this section. These particular plants may be considered too enthusiastic for some people, and they are hesitant to use them, but you might just consider using them together. I love the fern-like foliage of the Illinois bundleflower in the spring. The fluffy white flowers are an excellent source of nectar, and the interesting seed pods are eaten by birds. In summer, the tropical sage and then spurred butterfly pea take the stage. You can see a bit of the next actor beginning to peek through at the bottom of the middle photo, blue mist. From September through November, blue mist flower provides a nectar feast for butterflies as well as other pollinators. The blue mist starts encroaching on the coreopsis at this time, but the coreopsis won't bloom again for a couple of months. Directly above the monarch You can see a bit of the Illinois bundleflower squeezing back through. This slide shows a different concept of seasonal bloom using layered plantings. In the back middle is one of the loblolly pines. Carolina jessamine is growing up from the base, and it is covered in bright yellow blooms in early spring. The tall perennials in the middle are frostweed and also known as white crownbeard. These are excellent nectar sources in the fall. The native Ruellia in the front have pretty lavender blooms during the summer. The next slide shows the other side of this same pine tree. The beautyberry provides mid-level structure on the other side of the pine. Some people talk about the magenta berries that persist through the fall, but the songbirds in my yard devour the berries as soon as they start appearing in late summer. I use a lot of Turk's cap. It does well in the shade throughout the summer and provides nectar for butterflies, native bees, and hummingbirds. The large leaves and bright red blossoms provide an interesting visual contrast to many other plants. The understory provides critical habitat for songbirds. The pair of cardinals are searching through pine needles and leaves for nutritious insects. They are directly below a bird bath with a spray mist, which keeps the ground damp. On hot afternoons, the birds literally line up in nearby shrubs to get a turn under the mister. When one bird takes too long, the next one will fly in as a gentle reminder that time is up. The view on the right shows the bed along the back fence where there had been a row of large non-native viburnums. They froze in the 2021 winter storm, and I replaced them with 8 15-gallon wax myrtles last winter. Along the fence, we placed branches as well as other yard clippings. This provides hiding places for small critters and eventually decomposes. This bed is mulched with leaves, and the songbirds enjoy a variety of insects living in the decomposing leaves. The lower left shows a branch that came from one of the pine trees and was then placed along the edge of a bed of inland sea oats. It continues to provide food and shelter for numerous tiny creatures that support the cycle of life in the habitat. The oaks and hackberry provide plentiful habitat for caterpillars in the spring, and in the fall, berries and seeds supply additional sources of food for songbirds. The pollinator garden also provides lots of seeds. The pollinator garden is a long bed alongside my driveway. All parts are shaded at some time during the day, so it's been somewhat of a challenge to find plants that are excellent sources of nectar and pollen, but that can still tolerate some shade. Not everything that I've planted here has been successful. Directly behind the native pollinator sign are the tall American basket flowers. They were the most sought after nectar sources while they were in bloom. Their flowers provide a large platform that supports butterflies and large native bees, as well as small pollinators. By late summer, this bed looks rather messy, but the pollinators seem to like it that way. I try to allow volunteers to grow until I can determine if they're desirable. That's how the American basket flower came to the garden. I continue to be amazed at the array of wildlife that have found this patch of flowers. Just a few of the winged visitors that came this summer. Even though it's called a pollinator garden, it seems to have something for everyone. Amphibians and small reptiles use it for habitat, and songbirds eat the seeds during the winter. I've used many resources in my search for information about creating native habitats, but these are some that I found most helpful in selecting plants. I attended my first NLCP workshop in 2017 and have relied extensively on that plant list. We are fortunate enough to live in a region where we can support at-risk species like this American bumblebee and also the monarch butterfly. Providing habitat for creatures like these is my goal. Thank you.
Wow. Oh, Cheryl. We'd love to invite ourselves out sometime to see that garden. Very good. All right, on to the next garden. I think it's going to be a little bit of a contrast. Scott Buckel, and his garden is mostly on his patio and in containers.
Sorry I can't attend the meeting tonight due to other obligations, but I've decided to put together a little video to welcome you to my sort of patio native plant garden. All the plants, for the most part, are in containers, and most of the things that I've grown have always been in containers. You'll notice there's one small area that has, and I'll take note of that during the presentation, that is in the ground. But I wanted to let you go ahead and see, kind of let you get an idea of how the garden changes over time, and you get to see part of what's happened while I've been growing plants for the Bayside Regional Park project that a lot of us have been working on. What I've done in this case is every month I've given a great an overview of what's going on in the patio by kind of making a sweep around the patio. And then I go into some segments showing individual plants, blooms, different creatures that I have found on the patio for those days, and let you see kind of what goes on over time. So I hope you enjoy, and we'll go ahead and get started now. Thanks. Here we are in the garden in mid-May. Gulf Coast penstemon is blooming. Lance leaf coreopsis, blanket flower blooming. You see lots of things are green. And we have seedlings of grasses growing up for the Bayside project. Wolfberry, lance leaf coreopsis, number of different things growing up and seedlings. And of course, passion vine, which was a very small little plant last fall. Woolly pipe vine. There's rough coneflower, probably my favorite coneflower. And there's other members in this 4x4 planter, including Amsonia, Manfreda, rattlesnake master, the lance leaf coreopsis, Indian blanket with inland sea oats, Missouri ironweed, Virginia wild rye, and of course my mallows are starting to pop up. Seedlings for the Bayside project are looking good, and my favorite milkweed, aquatic milkweed. In June, things continued to bloom. You'll see there's a few new things, which I'll point out a little bit later. But you can see things look really good. And I started transplanting some of the plants for Bayside Park. You can see those in the new planters here. And you can see a few other things growing. Lance leaf coreopsis was blooming. Lots of seedlings all over the place. My green milkweed finally bloomed for the first time, which was nice to see. And you see the aquatic milkweed, which was just below it and on another part of the patio as well. Passion vine grows really, really well, and notice it's filled in a lot more. And one of my favorites, blanket flower. And here's this big planter. You see Louisiana catchweed and rattlesnake master, rough coneflower. Here's the close-up of the bloom of the Louisiana catchfly. You see it in various different stages. And longleaf, lance leaf coreopsis, of course the mallows. And I've done some more transplanting of grasses. So some of the things you saw in trays last month are now in these little cardboard containers ready to go to Bayside. Here we are in the month of July. See little things, a lot of things are blooming. The mist flowers not quite blooming yet. You see the plants are growing that I've been transplanting for Bayside. Been deadheading. The coreopsis is still blooming. And here we have the flower for the passion vine. Aquatic milkweeds blooming profusely. My tomatosa pipe vine has not been blooming, but caterpillars have appeared and they're all over a number of the plants. Louisiana catchflower and rattlesnake master are still blooming. And you give a laser close-up of the Louisiana catchfly, sorry, and Texas star hibiscus, and one of my new plants, Virginia wild rye. And you see Missouri ironweed below it, and some Missouri ironweed that's starting to bud out, which is rather early, and wolfberry that I'm growing that I collected myself. August was the fourth and final month that I worked on this video, and you can see there's still things greening up. There's still things that look very nice. You see some blooms on the mistflower. You see that the grasses are growing very well, and I've been transplanting a few things here and there. A few things have died off. You see all the grasses we've been growing for Bayside. The passion flower is still blooming with little ants running all over it. One of my favorites of all time is the aquatic milkweed with a little caterpillar that hopefully you can see that. And the Missouri ironweed is starting to bloom, which is a little bit earlier than normal. The inland sea oats are forming little oats, and some of them are starting to turn brown. My Greg's mistflower has been attracting lots and lots of butterflies, and it's one of my favorite mistflowers. And the lance leaf coreopsis was blooming profusely. I've been deadheading it all summer, and it bloomed all the way to September. Gulf Coast penstemon went to seed, and here's more plants for the Bayside project. You guys see how things have been growing over the last couple of months. And these plants will be going into Bayside in late October, early November. And thank you for watching.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Wow. All of that in what looked like a small little patio space. So there are no excuses. Not, oh, I don't have any space. All right, let's go on to our next presenter is going to be Rowena McDermid.
Hello, my name is Rowena McDermid, and this evening I'm going to talk to you all about the pond project that I and my husband Rob did together over the last couple of years. So here is a before picture of our backyard, no pond, and one day in spring last year my husband came to me and he said, "What do you think if I built a pond in the backyard?" And I think he was expecting me to say no, because historically I've been kind of anti-muddy holes in the backyard, especially with pets and children. But the children have grown up now, and the pets, the beloved pets, have sadly passed on. And so it seemed like a good idea. I was very keen, in actual fact, to see if we can get some more birds into our backyard. But my one stipulation was that he was not allowed to go and buy any plants from a pond nursery for the pond. He had to let me plant it up with native plants. And so he agreed to that. He was fine with that. There he is. And this was what I had in mind. Something small, tinkle of water coming down, little drop. Some native plants in there, looking quite pretty. I suspect this is what he had in mind, something massive, nearly taking up a whole backyard. In fact, he still tells me he wants to keep on making the pond bigger and bigger and bigger. So not that I don't like the look of this, it's just that I really do think he had a massive construction in mind. So after several days of digging, this is what we ended up with. A big muddy hole, and this photograph we'd already planted a couple of plants in there. So we have a common reed and an iris, and I think this thing here had a spider lily in it. So we were ready to, we had started our adventure. And then we got the frost. It didn't really do anything to the pond. It didn't kill any of the plants in it. But this is a good photograph to show you of what the bed behind the pond used to look like. It used to be just a narrow bed going along the fence line. So what we decided to do, rather than join up a bed with this bed and then, just have it looking squeezed in, we decided to create one big bed like this for the whole pond. And so this is what it ended up looking like. See the bed coming out from next to the gate and coming all the way around. This is a drain in our backyard, floodwater line underneath it, and this is our pond going around like this. One of the first things we did, even before we got all those plants in, was to go out and find some mosquito fish to add to our pond. We went to a nearby ditch, put them in a dip net, put them in a bucket, came home, put them in the pond. My husband was very excited about that. Yes, even a couple of years later, he still goes and checks on his fish a couple of times a day. He can tell you where they all are, how many pregnant females he has. Yes, he enjoys the fish. Okay, so some of the other things that we've planted. This is a spider lily that eventually came up. This was this spring, not last spring. It took a couple of years to get it to bloom. Here's the iris in bloom, the blue flag iris. Here is the common reed, or the Juncus effusus, in bloom. Water lilies did very nicely, and they've been fun. They've been flowering consistently throughout the warm season, so we've enjoyed having those. And you can see in the back we've got pickerel weed as well, of course. What you can see from this side is I planted an eastern gamagrass because I thought it would do well in that spot, and it has done well in that spot. In fact, it's practically taken over that entire side of the pond, so I need to cut it back next spring. This is the little river running down the pond, into the pond. The pump is at the top here, so it takes water from the pond and it basically just pumps it round and round and round. It keeps it aerated, and we were hoping this trickle of water would help the birds come into our backyard. Haven't seen too many songbirds, and we've got a couple of theories about that, but I'll chat about that in a little bit. Once again, the water lilies are looking very nice. Things are starting to fill in a bit here. You can see, no, you can't see very well in this one. But in this one, we've got some muhly that I planted. We've got some lance-leaf coreopsis that I ended up getting from a nursery and planting. Things are growing up nicely, looking good. My Lindhamer's bee balm this spring created such a show. I really loved it. The button bush I've planted has grown up tall and nice. It looks really nice. This is just a little bit further back. You can see the size of the bed we created here, and we haven't filled it with plants. I did put in a couple of coral beans. I think those might have been a mistake. Oh, there's a frog fruit going absolutely mad. Here's the coral bean. And as you can see, we didn't get a picture of the blooms, but the blooms are pretty and the seed pods are extremely attractive. But we're wondering whether it's a mistake because it does grow so vigorously and it is so thorny. Have to keep on cutting it back, or we end up getting, when we're trying to weed around it, we end up getting scratches and things on our hands. Here you can see our button bush, how nice and tall it's grown. But the Virginia sweet spire that went in about the same time hasn't really grown at all, so that's not happy. It hasn't died yet, it's just stayed the same. So we're not quite sure what to do about that. So this rain, this is this summer, end of August, when we eventually got some rain. Of course, with rain, makes you think of frogs. And so this again was earlier in the spring. We didn't get many frogs, but we did get Gulf Coast toads. And in the spring, there was all the calling and the calling and the calling. They were making quite a racket. And then eventually there was toad spawn. And then just about a week or so later, we ended up with lots and lots of these tiny little toadlets. I mean, hundreds of them. Aren't they cute? We've also had dragonflies. Don't ask me why we don't have any photographs of dragonflies, but we do have a video clip of a dragonfly larvae. Some of our visitors weren't quite so welcome. Some of you may recognize this as the grape leaf skeletonizer moth caterpillar, and here's some skeletonized grape leaves to prove that's what it was. Again, from earlier in the spring, this was an old monarch, flowed north from Mexico, and he found some perennis milkweed in my front yard to enjoy to nectar off. So I don't know why people are turning their nose up at perennis milkweed. I find it is a fabulously easy plant to grow, and the monarchs like it just fine. Okay, some random plants that have come up. This is a black-eyed Susan. Oh, here's the pickerel weed next to the pond, and you can just about make up here Mr. Froggy. He's got a home in the back of the pond now too. More of the water lilies. And I think this is one of the reasons we did not have songbirds in our garden. So this is Mrs. Owl. She's different from the Mrs. Owl who arrived 2 years ago. We had a grey Mrs. Owl, and this time we had a rufous Mrs. Owl. And she stayed for a little while. In fact, we didn't even realise she was there, and we decided, it was quite early, it was February, and we decided we'd better go up there and make sure there weren't any wasps in the owl nest. So Rob got out the ladder and he went up, and he was just about to open the door when she popped her head out, and I don't know who got the bigger surprise, her or Rob. But anyway, she was there, and she did not take offence at that first assault on her dignity, so she stayed. She eventually had 2 owlets. We saw their faces from time to time, and we saw her and Dad going back and forth feeding them, and we saw them encouraging the owlets out onto the branches, and then eventually they were gone. So hopefully that means that they successfully fledged. But we think her presence in the tree right next to the pond was probably one of the main reasons we didn't see any songbirds using the pond. And the other reason is that we had a red-shouldered hawk using the pond to bathe in as well. So it wasn't really a friendly space for songbirds. So no good deed goes unpunished. So my husband decided he wanted to make the pond bigger again. So just as it was starting to look nice, he went and let it empty a bit, and he's dug it out to make it bigger. All my nice muley, my coreopsis, everything I had here is gone. I managed to rescue the muley. I've planted it elsewhere, and maybe it'll come back next year. This is what it looked like when he was done with it. It still needs more water in it, but as you can see, all my plants here are gone. I put them created a new bed here. So, but yeah, this was getting a little bit untidy, and I'm fine with untidy, but Rob is not so keen on. He wanted to put a pathway through there to make it easier to go through there. So this is what it looks like now. We've carried on the edge, around the edge here, because it was also suggested to us that maybe we had too many plants too close to the edge, and it made birds frightened to approach because there wasn't a safe space for them. There was too many places for predators to hide. So this is what this was about. This was about clearing the space and creating a more open area, but still with the trees and the grasses and the things around it. And this was after it rained today. So this is the very latest photograph of our pond. Mr. Frog is still sitting there. The eastern gamma grass needs a good chopping back. And I'm hopefully the muley, which is now out here, will recover, and it'll cover a whole space that we won't have to mow again. And so for next spring, my project is going to be this bed, which, as you can see, we had some fall obedient plant growing in, which really enjoyed being there. But as you can see, it all comes and grows over the path next to the pond, and it doesn't grow at the back of the bed. So I'm going to have to come up with a plan to get something to grow up at the back of the bed. And that's all for me today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rowena. That's so fun to hear your comments about working together with your husband. Wendy's up next. She's created a bird and pollinator paradise in her backyard. Let's see what she and Andy have done.
Hi everyone, I'm Wendy Reistle, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my backyard. So here's a photo of my house. I live in a typical subdivision. You have to be a little bit careful about how many native plants that I put in the front yard, but I have a little bit more leeway in the backyard. Going to our backyard, we've got a couple of things back there. We've got a nice little seating area so we can look out on our garden and have coffee in the morning. Also have a bird feeder up that we put up in the fall, and we'll take it down in the spring. I like to look at the chickadees and the goldfinch that come and visit in the fall and the winter. And behind the bird feeder is what we have is our prairie garden. So this is where most of our plants are in the backyard. A couple other things that I like having in the garden is a pathway. So it's really nice to be able to walk around the garden, it's helpful to be able to weed it and to get back into some little secret spaces we have back there. Is a bench that we like to sit at also, and to drink coffee or tea. And then I also have, my husband likes to do woodworking, so he's built a potting up bench for me to use whenever I go and take plants out or put plants in the garden. Other features have a little bridge that connects the path, and then some garden art to make it a little more interesting. So I'm going to start with the early spring, and this is Virginia Sweet Spire. Virginia Sweet Spire blooms about February to March. It's one of the first things that come out, and it's really, really beautiful. It's got a white cascading type flower on it. I planted this plant probably a little bit too close to the fence and too close to the pathway. I spent a lot of time cutting it back and trying to make it stay within its boundaries, but all those cuttings get potted up for the plant sale, so at least they're not wasted. This is one of my favorite things to see in the spring. It's usually one of the first things that comes out. Also have some blue bonnets, probably like a lot of other folks in the backyard. A nice patch of little blue bonnets. This right here is spring plantain. So it comes up in the early spring as well. And then the difference in February to April is February just got like a green rosette. And then April, it sends up this really beautiful stalk that is red and kind of white and green. And then it has a white flower on top. This plant kind of dies back after it blooms, and so I have a hard time finding it again until it comes up the next spring. I don't remember planting a lot of these plants here, but the pink ones are evening primrose, and these up here in the top are Philadelphia fleabane, and then some lyre-leaf sage. These things are perhaps considered weeds by some people, but I really like having them in the backyard. Sometimes they even leave them in the front yard. One of the first things that come up in the spring, and the pollinators really are looking for things in the spring. So I see a lot of little bitty bees and wasps and flies on these plants. And so I always leave them in the backyard, even when they kind of grow over the borders, because they don't last that long. A nice little reminder that spring is on the way. Another plant that we have is rosinweed, blooms in the early spring as well. This one is coral honeysuckle, and it's got those really beautiful blooms on it in the spring and really throughout the summer and even a little bit into the fall. It is a vine, and so it grows up. Got this white trellis here for it to grow up on. You can cut this back pretty much any time of the year. I've cut it back quite a bit, and it always comes back, but it's a great plant to have for the hummingbirds, and it's just really, really pretty. Over here on the left, I have some seaside goldenrod in the spring. So this is what it looks like before it flowers. And then on the right is a Amsonia. It's got a blue flower on it. It likes to bloom again in the early spring. It also likes to be in a wet place. So I've got it near a water faucet at home. And so it seems to be happy there. It gets enough water. It's been blooming and producing seeds. So it's producing seeds right now, but blooming in the spring. It's a short-lived bloom, but it's really beautiful. Another plant that I have actually in the front yard and the backyard is red buckeye. Again, a really nice bloom for the hummingbirds in the early spring. It's of course a native plant. It will drop off its leaves in the summertime. And so sometimes you don't even know where it is because it kind of looks like a stick. But in the early spring, it's absolutely beautiful. Just a photo of what the backyard looks like in the spring. And then, so that's another little piece of yard art that I like. Just wanted to show him off. He's made out of recycled materials, a spoon, a fork, and a knife there. Just a comparison between the spring and the fall. This is one of my favorite trees. This is a sassafras. It's an understory tree. I've got it growing under a couple of live oaks. We just noticed that we didn't really have much of an understory space for birds and for insects. And so we're trying to put some more of those trees in there. But it's a deciduous tree. And so it will drop all those leaves in probably a month or so. And again, kind of look like the red buckeye, just like a stick. But then it does come back in the spring with a full set of leaves. I also like to garden, so I have vegetable gardens in the backyard. My favorite time of the year is fall garden, so I like to grow sugar snap peas and onions. I used to grow a lot of things like kale and spinach that really no one eats in my house, so I started just growing the things that we actually eat. And this is from one of our neighbors left this out on the side of the street. It says pine needles, pine needle mulch, free. I was like, oh my goodness, I have to go and pick that up. So I got 2 bags of pine needles for free, and they are fantastic mulch on your vegetable beds or your native beds. That's some of the best mulch that I've ever used, is things that I pick up for free in the neighborhood. One of my favorite summer photos, and I don't have very many of the summer, but this is a basket flower, and it's after a big rain, and so it's a little bit drenched, and the bee is there getting some nectar from it. So I thought that was a really cool photo to share. And here we are to the fall, and this is the goldenrod, and the goldenrod here on the left is growing actually in my vegetable garden, and I actually put quite a bit of effort into trying to remove this goldenrod because it is in my vegetable garden. I cut it down, I tried to dig it out, but it's kind of right under the garden, and so it was really difficult. So I'm like, fine, you can just stay here, but I'm just going to keep cutting you down. And so I left it, and it actually bloomed. It's probably like maybe 1 foot tall, but it's actually really pretty. And I think I am going to leave it there for one reason, because I can't get it out. And then here's some more goldenrod in the picture on the right. So it does tend to get pretty tall. It can get up to like 6 feet tall, but I found that you can also really just cut it off and it will bloom just as pretty in the fall. Some more photos of the fall. We've got some Gulf Coast muley down here on the left blooming. Got some beautyberry in the back. I don't know if you can really tell where it is. There's some Turk's cap back here. Got a couple of plum trees. And then over on this side, we've got some blue mist flower. It's kind of what it looks like right around now. There's a little bit of salvia still blooming. And then again, kind of what it looks like right now. You can see more of the salvia. There's also this orange flower in here, and I don't know where it came from. I think it's a California poppy, and I tried to get them out for the longest time, but again, they're just about as tenacious as the goldenrod. And I decided to leave them, and they're actually really beautiful this time of year. And I've been noticing that the pollinators are also using them as well. So there you have it. There's my backyard. Thank you for joining us.
All right, thank you. Final person is our own Debbie Bush. She is going to take us a tour of her front and her backyard in progress. So take it away, Debbie.
Hello. I hope you have been inspired by what you've seen so far. I'm Debbie Bush, and I'm going to give you a quick tour of my very much in progress yard. We'll start in the backyard, where I have perennials in containers, shrubs, and trees. And then we'll go to the front yard, where most of the work has taken place. I started my native backyard in the spring of 2021. I have 2 large planters on my 10 by 10 patio that I've had for years. up until I started planting natives, I would change the plants out seasonally with mostly non-natives like hibiscus, which I love. I started this planter that you see in the photo as an experiment with plants that I bought at the chapter's plant sale. I planted a Texas lantana in the middle. You can see it's doing really well. And the reddish and orange flowers are from the same plant. Those bloomed first, but by the end of summer, all the flowers were the familiar orange and yellow. I found that really interesting, and I haven't never seen that before. I also put in 3 Gulf penstemon around the edge of that same container. These I planted in March, and by April, the penstemon had grown and were blooming. I started to see a lot of native bees stopping by, so I consider this a success. And I had a volunteer scarlet sage show up in this planter. It was a pleasant surprise to find it growing there. So I kept it, and it did really well with the other plants. I now have the salvia popping up all over my backyard, which I'm not mad about. My other container, which is identical, had what I thought was scarlet sage, but it turned out to be a cultivar, probably pineapple sage. I had planted some other natives in with it, purple lovegrass and some more Gulf Coast penstemon, but the sage took over the planter, as you can see in the photo. I ended up relocating the natives, but I had seen hummingbirds on the sage, so I let it stay. However, it did not survive the freeze this year. Now, I have a newly planted Texas lantana that I bought at this fall's plant sale. And the berries are starting to ripen, so I'll see if I can grow lantana from seed. Another experiment. I also have a growing patch of Maximilian sunflowers. These flowers are so beautiful and attract a lot of pollinators, and it's really resilient plant. And then I have a rather large American beautyberry that was planted by a bird, I presume. It is gorgeous and attracts a lot of birds, especially mockingbirds. I've also seen cardinals rummaging around in the branches, possums, and small rodents eating the berries. Yikes! Also in my backyard, I have a bird-planted sugar hackberry on the right. It's on the fence line, so I have tried to get it out several times to no avail. It just keeps coming back. I've given up on that, but I do cut it down to a stump every spring. The fence line is here, and this is the growth since this spring. It is a very fast grower. Birds use it, so it's staying for now. The mora, or red mulberry, on the left is a new addition to the backyard. I love eating these berries straight from the tree. I used to run around with purple fingers all summer long as a child, and it brings back great memories of time spent with my grandparents. And I've learned that red mulberry is a larval host plant for the morning cloak, and the sugar hackberry is the larval host for the hackberry emperor. Both butterflies are found in the Houston area. Also in my backyard, I keep a small herb garden. I have a new potting bench and a rain barrel similar to this one, which came in very handy during the busted pipe days of Uri. And now we go to the front yard. This is where the majority of the planting has taken place. I started in the front in 2019. It took me a long time to manually dig out a volunteer sugar hackberry, the 4 dwarf Yopon hollies that were in there, and a crepe myrtle. I am still fighting the crepe myrtle. You can see it popping up back here, but I will continue until it is all gone. There were a few other plants in there, azaleas, but those died out on their own. I guess they didn't like being at the back of the flower bed. This front bed is under a live oak, so there is a lot of shade all day long. Here's what I have growing successfully in there. Chilepequin, I love it. The mockingbirds love it. I've seen them picking berries early in the morning. Then they go to the backyard to snack on the beauty berries. Turk's cap, I planted this one 2 years ago, and it's really starting to flourish now. Seaside goldenrod, I have this growing in a shallow container on the porch, one of my container experiments. It stays pretty short, but it still blooms beautifully. My favorite grass, inland sea oats. This one has migrated from where it was originally planted. It wasn't thriving where I had it, but now that it's moved, it's growing and filling in the space nicely. Black-eyed Susan was the first native plant I planted in this bed. It's not a good place for it because of all the shade, but it has been multiplying and blooming for several years now. And I plan on moving the 8 or so plants that I have to a new bed I'll be creating in a sunnier location. The scarlet sage is doing great. It grows about 5 feet tall in its spot and blooms profusely. So I guess it's happy. And then new to the bed this fall, Mexican plum. This is actually my 3rd one, I believe. The first 2 are really small and just didn't make it. So I'm hoping this larger one will. Narrowleaf silkgrass, new and not new. I accidentally pulled it out thinking it was nutsedge or something like that, but it's back now, and the reason I'm leaving all my markers with my plant. Also, not a grass. It's actually an aster. Blue-eyed brass, also not a grass. Love this little iris. It's so pretty when it blooms. Prairie wedge scale is a grass that is new to me. I placed it toward the back of the bed and we'll see what happens. I've also planted this cute little false aloe to keep all of my aloe veras company. And Virginia sweetspire. This one is also new, not new. I have planted this one in this bed several times now with no success. So this time, taking a cue from Greg Pearson and his milkweed growing technique, I decided to plant it in the ground, in the pot, and it seems to be working. Both plants have put up new growth, and it's very exciting to see. Speaking of Greg, I received 2 aquatic milkweed plants from their last workshop, So finding a good place for them to live is my next assignment. Finally, this summer, I discovered that one of my black-eyed Susan plants had flowers with tubular ray petals. It's one of the babies that came from the plants I purchased a few years ago at the plant sale. I'd never seen this before, so naturally I looked it up. I didn't find a lot about this happening in the wild, but I did find that Henry Eilers, a horticulturalist who owned a nursery and landscaping business, developed this cultivar, Rudbeckia subtomentosa Henry Eilers, after he discovered a wild population of the Rudbeckia subtomentosa with the mutation. So I collected seed from my plant, but have yet to sow them. I don't know if they will germinate. So it seems like I'll be conducting another experiment soon. Have you seen this before? Let me know in the chat. And that is a tour of my yard. It has been a slow process for me, but I am liking the way it's shaping up. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Debbie. Great, great, great. We want to try to go through some of the chat questions. We got quite a few, or maybe they're comments. Let's see. I'll start at the beginning. Great presentation. There was a discussion about girdling the hackberry if you really want it out. There's a guy on YouTube that has a girdling technique. So we'll let you, Debbie, look at the. Oh, Marie Ashcheck says we made mulberry pies out of the mulberry.
That sounds delicious.
Oh, did you build the potting bench, Wendy?
Oh, I'm so talented. No, I did not make it, but Andy did. He is actually talented.
All right. Rowena, how high did you place your owl house?
As high as my husband could reach from the top of like a 7-foot ladder. So I can't give you an exact measurement. It is quite high. It must be about 12 feet up.
Yeah, because he's quite tall, isn't he?
Yeah.
Did you purchase the owl house?
We did. It was a Christmas present for me. So yes, it was a ready-made owl house bought over the internet. You know, you can make an owl house, but this is a rather nice one. So yes, it was bought.
Well, okay. It's darling with the pictures of the owl
Yeah.
peeking out at us. How deep is your pond, Rowena?
Oh,
Which
really
one?
need to help me answer this. I'm thinking at the deepest part is probably about 18 inches deep. It could be a lot deeper, but
Okay.
yes.
Scott, what are the larger containers you use for growing grasses for your project? Are those empty milk cartons that look like?
Look like milk cartons.
Yeah, we'll try to get a verification from Scott.
Those are not milk cartons. They came that way. He purchased them.
Oh.
Oh, you buy them flat and then turn them into a square, whatever you call a tall square. It's not a cylinder. And they have a basket that they sit in so that you can put things with longer roots in them. And then you just plant everything in the ground. It falls apart because we planted them this last couple of Fridays at Bayside.
Oh, decomposes, huh?
Yes.
Wow.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Sounds like great for growing buckeyes and post oaks. I need to get Scott's information on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
He got them from David Hansen.
Write that down.
I am.
Lovely garden, Cheryl. Oh, agree. Beautiful. And I loved your way you were able to tell us the story about it. Do you also use any bird feeders with bird seed, Cheryl?
We do put bird feeders out. We have bird feeders out, and we have a number of watering dishes also for the bird.
Okay, okay. Cheryl, how do you get chili pekin to be so full, green, and fruitful? Mine is leggy and no fruit. Do you trim back? And if so, what time of year?
I don't do much with that. It does like shade, and I know if it winds up being in an area that starts getting more sun, it looks a little ragged. But I trim a lot of things. I can't remember actually trimming that back, but I trim pretty vigorously. And so if something starts looking pretty leggy, it's likely I've cut it back. I think Debbie grows a lot of that too. I don't know if she's got some ideas about it.
Yeah, I don't really do too much. I do trim it back when it starts getting a little wild. Yeah, I just let it do its own thing. And mine is in pretty much full shade.
Oh.
So right now it's about 3.5 feet tall, and it's got a lot of berries.
Uh-huh. They had a nice lush one out at the farmhouse at Armand Bayou, with a lot of berries on it. I was thinking it was more in a sunny area. So maybe, I don't know. Now that's an annual, right?
Perennial.
Perennial?
I mean, yeah, I've had mine for a while now.
Same. Okay, I was thinking you had to replant. All right. Well, it's been a little longer meeting, but I think we've loved every minute of it. Bye-bye.